Hello everybody, this is Prudence Collon, event director and host of today's Copperberg webinar, Competence 4.0, We the People. Prior to getting into the gist of the matter, I would like to inform you that the content of this webinar will be made available online within 2 days. And as far as the questions that you may have, I would invite you to tune in into the app and send your question that will be answered during our Q&A session. So, We the People, Competence 4.0 webinar is about the future of the manufacturing workforce and how innovation, digitalization, Industry 4.0 affect the brand, the people, and the competencies. With us today, to answer our question are two very prominent thought leaders, Mr. Saul Sundar, Managing Director of Saul Sundar LLC, brand strategist and former brand strategist for Mr. Barack Obama. And our second presenter today is Mr. Remy Glaisner, co-founder of Remy Research and IOT Competencies expert. As you may know, the manufacturing and industrial landscape everywhere is now experiencing the effect of the industrial IoT with big data analytics, digital infrastructure, 3D printing, automation, robotization, augmented reality, industrial intelligence, and more. The driving factor behind this change is increased profitability, operational efficiency, and survival. Up until now, discussion about digitalization and IoT focus more on technologies and process integration. What we're doing now with Competence 4.0 is to focus on the people and how digitalization affects people within organization to actually provide a better understanding of what to expect. Saul Sundar and Remy would discuss how this incremental change affect organization top asset, people, competencies, and brand. Let me now leave the mic to Saul to introduce himself, and then Remy to introduce himself as well. Saul, are you there with us?
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks, Prudence. I'm Saul Sundar. I'm a brand strategist, designer, and writer. I've been working for more than 20 years with companies of all sizes, shaping their brands, differentiating them in the marketplace, and helping them resonate with all their constituencies, including customers, partners, investors, and employees. In late 2006, I led the development of the brand identity, specifically the logo for the Obama 08 campaign, which we felt was real breakthrough work in the realm of politics. We brought core brand development principles to that realm in some new and novel ways. Since then, for the past 8 years, my main client has been IBM. I've been working across that organization to help shape their Smarter Planet message and vision, celebrate their centennial in 2012, and hope most recently help reposition them for the era of cognitive computing, which is the term they've coined for AI. In the manufacturing space, I'm proud to have recently completed a core piece of brand narrative and positioning work for Stratasys, a global leader in applied additive technology solutions. Happy to speak with you all today about the challenges and opportunities that you face in this new and exciting era.
Thank you very much, Saul. Remy, would you care to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, sure. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Remy Glaisner. I'm the founder of this boutique analyst firm called Remy Research. I'm based out of Boston, in the US. For the past 5 years for Remy Research, my job basically has been to deliver strategic consulting engagements covering the application of multiple technologies, including IoT, robotics, and other digital technology to apply to the enterprise digital transformation through technology maturity assessments, deployment scenario, change management best practices, go-to-market strategy modeling, all the things. In terms of clients, when it comes to manufacturing clients, as probably all of you know, manufacturing and generally speaking the industrial space is very robotic intensive and has been a vertical sector that has been served and addressed by robotics provider as well as other digital technology provider for a while. So clients include the ABB of the world, Siemens, a lot of manufacturers also in Asia. Generally speaking, when it comes to the function I support at manufacturers, it's actually pretty diverse. This is why we came up about 2.5 years ago with a concept called the Chief Robotic Officer, which actually reflects how within an organization virtually all functions are will have to be engaged when it comes to digital transformation and Industry 4.0, as as it is often referred to in the manufacturing space.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Remy, for that. The agenda of today is that we're going to start with addressing how IoT and industrial innovation affect the brand. So Saul would address how manufacturing companies can increase their corporate brand equity and improve the employee brand identity. Then we're going to focus on human capital management, how HR executive across the board can prepare for Industry 4.0. And the other point of today would be IoT competence development. What type of profiles, what type of competencies and expertise are required to help to navigate into the new Industry 4.0 era? After this, we're going to have the time for the audience and we're going to conclude our event. So we're going to start with Saul here and a focus on corporate branding equity. Saul, how would you assess today's manufacturing companies' ability to, how would you assess today manufacturing companies' brand experience and how should they improve, specifically in the era of Industry 4.0, in the era of industrial changes and disruption?
Yeah, well, I think every company is different, of course, and that's an important point. But I think when you look more broadly, brands today in the manufacturing space are confronted with somewhat of a dilemma in the sense that many of them are very successful, and their successes have their roots in the 20th century, some even earlier, and those are important successes, and the roots of that success, the culture and methodologies and even people that made that possible are all essential to who the companies are. But we're also facing such a time of disruption and change and so much excitement about Industry 4.0 and all the technologies that are possible there. It's some companies can, when you look out there, they're still stuck in their past. That's one issue. They haven't modernized. They're not looking to the future aggressively enough in either their business model or their brand. That being said, other companies are looking to the future in a kind of exaggerated way. That's an equal danger. You don't want to lean into innovation so far that it becomes inauthentic to who you actually are. So finding that intersection between your past successes and your future possibilities, and finding that in a true and authentic way, that's the real core challenge for any brand, and I think is especially relevant for manufacturing companies facing this kind of pivotal point in industry and technology.
Thank you very much for that. According to Deloitte 2016 survey on manufacturing brand perception, millennials do not find manufacturing brand very attractive, innovative, or capable of integrating modern workforce trend. What do you think manufacturing companies today should change, or what type of brand messaging should they adopt to deliver a better value and be more attractive?
Yeah, Well, it's easy to think that the new workforce, the millennials, are very technology forward, obviously, and you know, being contemporary with your use of digital tools and mobile friendly and all of those things is obviously important. But I think that I think the type of brand messaging that you want to look at delivering for your organization at this time, it needs to be true, it needs to be compelling, it needs to avoid cliches. This workforce, more than any other workforce, I would argue, they have a sense for what's true and authentic. And if you aren't, they'll smell it, and they'll smell it quickly. You might attract them, but you won't keep them. So to me, that's just as important as the technology component, and even perhaps more important. So true, compelling, avoiding cliches, supported by true believers in every part of your company and across your value chain. You know, that's the short answer. But finding that truth, and it's a truth that's rooted in your business success, giving voice to it. It's not always a quick thing. It's nuanced. Each word is important, and how it resonates across your organization is important to prototype and understand it as you refine and roll that out. Yeah, so I think that, you know, it's easy to think that technology is the key and innovation is the key, but truth and authenticity is going to be just as important to this audience.
Very good. You just mentioned truth and authenticity. We've seen recently in the news many corporate misfire by very high-profile tech companies. What is your take on, let's say, reputation management and what companies today should do to protect their brand, to protect their brand, most generally speaking?
Yeah, I mean, you be honest and fix it. Don't spin it. I think the kind of spinning that we've seen with Equifax recently here is a kind of case in point. I mean, I think the resignation of their CEO is, you know, ultimately, you know, that was the most authentic thing they could do after all the misfires that were made, and the use of I mean, there were some very strange things that happened in the use of their PR company and their attempt to fix things on the front end of their digital experience, which ended up just being PR tactics, and you know, became relatively transparent. Other examples are kind of interesting. You know, companies that build automated systems of engagement, like Uber, are, you know, I think they're really protected by the strength of the operating system they've built. You know, what's interesting about them is, regardless of their problems, their culture, which is significant, as a customer, I'm largely unaffected by them because, and I don't like to say that necessarily, but if I were working on Uber's core brand narrative, I'd really lean into a story of a new transportation infrastructure that's network activated. And the truth of the matter is that's largely, their culture is kind of strangely irrelevant with this kind of systems they've put into place. You know, the most disturbing stories about Uber are incidents between drivers and passengers, really even more than what happens internally at their culture. So they're you know, they're kind of a different case in a lot of ways, and an interesting one to study. You know, Equifax is a more traditional kind of corporate crisis, and they're an older type of company. Uber's a much newer one, and I think presents different kinds of challenges because of that.
Interesting. Recently, we had a discussion with Rosa Riera, who is the Vice President of Employer Branding at Siemens, and she mentioned the fact that when Siemens CEO announced digitalization and electrification as the top corporate priorities, what happened inside Siemens was an enhanced collaboration between HR, corporate corporate communication, branding, and engineering department to basically enhance their strategic, you know, objective. according to you, what type of, and she said that enhanced collaboration between departments help the brand, help the perception of the brand, and help internal corporate culture. According to you, why cross-functional collaboration is key to improving the brand perception inside and outside? And do you have examples that can highlight what is best out there, what best practices are out there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the answer to your question actually kind of lies in your question. It's it's the strongest brands are there's going to be very minimal friction between what they say externally to their external audiences, customers, partners, investors, and who they are internally to their employees. So reducing friction there and really making sure that there's integrity there is essential to a healthy brand. A couple of examples. I mean, we worked with IBM as part of a major kind of assessment of the brand in the deepest way, and they looked at their audience, and often brands will talk about their audiences. They'll find an umbrella way to talk about their audiences. So for IBM, it was the forward thinker in all of us, which was a very powerful statement both for external and internal, right? The forward thinker in all of us was really a uniting statement and powerful for a brand to say something like that. And it was just as important for HR to activate that with its employees. How do they support the forward thinker in all employees? Is that a training statement? Is that a learning statement? Is that a innovation support statement? And of course, how do they enable that with their customers? How do they enable their customers to develop forward-thinking businesses and lean into that mentality? On the flip side, with IBM, often with other companies that are claiming to be technology forward and even have software themselves, that they put out there that is meant to create new efficiencies in the marketplace. Large enterprises we often find on a technology front sort of shockingly behind, and systems as simple as employees submitting expenses are incredibly inefficient, take up a huge amount of time, very frustrating to employees, and really bespeak a certain relationship between its company and its employees. Bespeaks a kind of disrespect for their time, an inability for them to get compensated for the investment they make in the business. So mundane things like that can be places where the brand promise, strangely, actually really falls apart. They're like these hidden moments that can become real elements that undermine the promise that a company is making to its employees and the relationship between a promise it's making externally and internally.
Interesting. You take a lot of the example of IBM, which is one of the largest, let's say, tech company out there. Recently, I gathered that you've seen the advertisement by General Electric, who has put out a very innovative advertisement whereby they use a millennial to present himself as a future hire for GE. However, the interesting case about that advertisement was that nobody believed that a millennial could work at GE, because GE was perceived as the very traditional manufacturing company with production line. So the objective of that advertisement was to change the perception of working at GE and to tell the people that GE can actually hire software engineers, IT engineers, and so forth. The result of that advertisement was 40,000 plus application. But also the other result was the rebranding of GE from a traditional manufacturing company to a digital enterprise. Now, you are the branding expert. Do you think that this is a trend that most of the manufacturing companies should go through, as in rebranding themselves, changing the perception, or should they maintain their traditional image? What do you advise?
Well, I think everyone needs to look at digital transformation and have a perspective on where they stand there, and assess their brand and how it can evolve to either encompass the crucial elements there, or even change. With GE, it was a great piece of advertising, funny, entertaining, self-deprecating, and their core corporate messaging has also changed. They talk about themselves as a digital industrial company. Is it really rebranding, though? That's a question I'd ask. I'm not sure. GE still makes many of the same things. They show up in the world in most of the same ways that I know them for. And imagination at work has been their slogan for 10 or 20 years, and it's reinforced their credentials as an innovator already. So, what's different is what I'd ask. To what degree is the digital enterprise positioning a veneer that's meant to attract young talent versus actually impact the way GE does business and goes to market? The 40,000 job applications is a great number, but this question of how much the brand is really shifting is a question that talent will seek, and they'll be able to answer it pretty quickly. Like I said, most companies of GE's size struggle to be truly digital. They're weighed down by their decades of success. They can't simply stop being who they are and start over. And disruptors are moving much faster and at a smaller scale. I do think perceptions of GE is shifting. They've spent a lot of money shifting it, but the proof is going to lie deeper in the perceptions of the people that they hire will be the litmus test. It would be an interesting thing to ask those people, and perhaps GE will ask them at 6 months, 12 months, 24 months post-hire, if they last that long. Is this the company you were promised? Is this the job you imagined? At the heart of those answers will be the real answers about the brand, and to what degree GE's brand has actually shifted or is shifting.
That's interesting. You're talking about, disruptor. Point is that you work with one of the greatest disruptor of this latest 10 years. The 44th American president. You were his branding strategist. So you tell us how your experience as the top branding strategist for Mr. Barack Obama affect your own experience, and what can it bring to, let's say, manufacturing companies of all size?
Yeah. Well, our sense from the beginning was that Barack Obama was an authentic person, and that he had the integrity of a real leader, and that's what inspired us. It made us want to express something true in the brand that we created for him, and luckily we achieved that. We found a symbol that encapsulated what he meant to the world at that time. Every company, what I learned with that, or how I think about that in relationship to what I do for corporations or organizations, is that, and I've mentioned this a few times, every company has something authentic and true about it. And that truth is more often than not inherently differentiated from the competition. It really is at the root of a company's success. Seeking that truth and doubling down on it is key. If you think you need to change, if you truly think you need to change, then change. But don't just give it lip service to attract new customers or new employees. Make a commitment to being that change, while still understanding the roots of who you've been and what connects those two things. That's really what a strong brand does. That's what a strong company does, and it will do it at every level of the company. And we felt, I don't know, that's how I think about the relationship between the work we did for the Obama campaign and the work I do for corporations.
You tapped on something very interesting, and that helps actually our transition to the second focus of your presentation, which is employer branding. And you say that brand must be truthful as to how they address their employees. Now, the challenge here, I understand, is when it comes to disruption and digitalization, is how companies, and especially in the manufacturing world, engage employees into the entire effort. What would you advise for companies when it comes to engaging employees into the entire digital transformation? We're tapping a bit into, let's say, change management, but as a strong brand, how would a manufacturing company engage its employee into the overall corporate or digital transformation?
Yeah, I mean, you do have to look at how those new employees engage. So I do think you have to look at your digital system. I mean, you have to look at a roadmap or a journey map of those employees, from recruitment through interviewing, through onboarding, and then performance reviews, retention, promotion. I mean, there is a real journey there, and it's worth scrutinizing at all those levels. And thinking about how they do engage, thinking about technology, obviously the web, but more specifically mobile and social. Thinking about, psychographically, there's lots of data on how this generation is different, at least in the United States. It may be different by country a bit, but there are generational characteristics. I talk about their sort of sixth sense for authenticity. I think that's one component of it. But they also, in the United States, there's a lot of talk about them having this sense of entitlement. So, responsibility and promotion is a different kind of dynamic with them. So looking at all those psychographic and behavioral aspects of this new generation of employee and future leaders, and then again, looking at who you are and what your core principles and values and what your brand stands for, and seeking that intersection, there are going to be new ways to engage, but they're going to be truthful to who you are, and they're going to be appealing to who, based on who they are. And that's some hard work. It's important work. I think the digital components of it can be especially hard for companies, to engage for older companies to engage socially and over mobile. But I think some of those psychographic components, sense of entitlement, responsibility and promotion, when that happens, how early that happens, those can be even more challenging for companies.
Interesting. You mentioned the sense of entitlement and the criteria or the characteristic of today's workforce. That being said, many millennials today look at the startup model of organization, branding, and operation as the most attractive environment as opposed to traditional manufacturing company. What is your stand or your viewpoint on the matter? Should manufacturing company look into being more like startups, or stay within their lane? I know it's a bit repetitive, but again, it taps into let's say the millennial, the new trend, and so forth. So is the startup model of organization and branding something relevant for manufacturing company or not?
Well, of course, there's lots of elements to startup culture. So, everything from ping pong tables to agile development. I think there's some very interesting elements of startup culture that are relevant. I mean, ironically, agile development, which I'm very passionate about, agile software development is kind of a characteristic of many startup companies, but it has its roots in manufacture, in lean manufacturing, and Toyota's sort of breakthrough manufacturing lines, I think in the 70s, are generally considered to be the kind of initial inspiration for agile software development. So not only do I think that agile has relevance for manufacturing companies, the irony is that the roots of agile actually come from manufacturing companies. So that's one area that I think is especially relevant. The other thing to look at, I think, is traditional corporate structures, pyramid structures, matrixed organizations, many levels of hierarchy. Those can all be extremely inefficient and sort of very unattractive to this new generation of employee. You know, entitlement is kind of a pejorative way to talk about their expectations. Ambition is a sort of complementary way to talk about it. And traditional corporate structures can really get in the way for them and for all of us. You know, there's layers of management, increasing sort of layers of management of people who don't actually do anything. That's the sort of classic. But for some reason, companies feel like they need to grow in that manner. All that being said, shifting business models can be a real conundrum for large companies. They've built their business on technologies and methodologies that are still profitable, but maybe really endangered. And they can't afford to give up on those things, but their reliance on them is slowing them down and preventing them from keeping up with the new disruptors. So there are some conundrums there, but I think agility and flat organizations are two especially interesting areas to look at that, you know, many startups have adopted and can be powerful components of a corporate strategy for manufacturers today.
That's very good because you actually answer the follow-up question on internal culture. So I'm going to shift to the last question, where I'm going to also involve Remy. It's all about, let's say, what do you think the 21st century manufacturing brand is? Is it a digitally supercharged, socially engaged, AI fueled, shared on all platforms, robot-enabled brand? Is it what manufacturing companies' brand have to be today? And I invite Remy to let us know, to let us have his insight as well.
Yeah, I'll just say shortly, and then I'll turn it over to Remy a bit. Is you know. Does the 21st century manufacturing brand need to be digitally supercharged, social, AI fueled, robot enabled? Perhaps. Certainly it all needs to be considered, and it all needs to be considered and reconsidered constantly. But never innovation for innovation's sake. You know, one area that I think is interesting that's not mentioned there is real-time document collaboration. Most people know it as Google Docs. What I've witnessed is that has been truly transformative for companies, for people to be able to work in real time collaboratively, but extremely difficult for enterprises to adopt for good reasons, having to do with security and confidentiality and real business reasons. But and again, one of these conundrums. Is it important? Are you falling behind if you're not able to adopt those technologies? Arguably, yes, there are real societal shifts going on, real shifts in the workforce, real shifts in productivity that are, you know, sort of evolutionary for the human species. Are there real reasons why you can't adopt them? Yes. Everything from government regulations to industry regulations to business practices that you've been committed to for decades. You know, so what I would say is you always have to be looking at them, and you always have to be measuring, you know, doing the cost-benefit analysis and staking out the position that you think is the wisest one to be staking out at that particular moment in time.
Wonderful. Remy? What did you say?
Yeah, well, you know, well, first of all, I'm totally aligned with what Saul was saying, and actually, from my own perspective, I came across almost exactly the same. I think, generally speaking, there is a wrong perception carried by proliferation of social media, people being able to simply put together online what they think. Millennial, they might be at ease with social media and mobile technology and on, but that's a world away from what actually Industry 4.0 is. I mean, being at ease with social media and not being scared or feeling any fear about using new machines and everything is one thing. Knowing how to actually leverage them for the purpose of creating value for a corporation, that's not the same thing at all. Saul was mentioning this sense of entitlement from that generation. I think it's also probably communication and HR exercise to actually make sure and make clear that what is I mean, looking cool is one thing, but that won't be enough for them to attract the right talents. I mean, get plenty of millennials if you want. If they're not able to be creative beyond like suggesting to have like, I don't know, an internal portal to share ideas, well, that will only get you so far. Now, on the overall startup model for organization and everything, especially if you're a large manufacturing company that's been out there for quite a while, well, you might be looking at actually, I mean, if you're looking to change yourself and embrace a startup model, and like Saul was saying, there's very different aspects in what can be called a startup model. Well, it might be a stretch, but what you could do potentially as some kind of lab is to do like, well, say the JBL of the world, not to mention them, who are created some kind of structure, still part of the company, more like a lab by themselves, where they play with 3D printing, robotics, create hacking days, those kind of things, and communicate through the channels that are usually attractive to millennials, to actually slightly change their branding and give a different perception of what it is to work for a large manufacturer. No, it's not only gray. No, it's only just a terrible factory. No, and on and on. But that being said, enabling such a culture, it doesn't have to be the norm. Like Saul said, if you really have this sense of authenticity, and if you have that kind of like almost how can I say that roots that makes you who you are, trying to change it might indeed be a mistake, because at the end of the day, the reason why you're still here today is because your client probably trusts you. So what the most important thing to do, hiring people with a different mindsets gradually, or actually changing completely your branding, communication, the way you operate and everything, and take potentially the risk to be too fast for some of your clients and put yourself at risk. So that there's really a balance to be done here. And I would say that, generally speaking, if we think about adopting Industry 4.0 technology and everything as some kind of innovation, well, innovation is not a single event. It's a rather long process of discovery. So there's no need to actually envision Industry 4.0 as we have to be there by then. There will be many different steps, and as Saul was pointing out too, many companies are different. They will actually test and try different things, touching different corporate functions, not necessarily all of them at the same time, and somehow test ideas. So that's probably the right way to go.
To go about it?
Yes.
Sure. Remy, since you actually pointed out corporate function, we're going to shift to human capital management, all right, and how Industry 4.0 affect human resources and other function. So I'm going to hand the mic to you for the first question, which is how does Industry 4.0 really affect HR function? Should there be some new training, some new redefinition of HR function? Can you tell us briefly how Industry 4.0 affect HR function?
Sure. So first of all, you know, when the term Industry 4.0 is used right now, I would be curious to hear about, you know, HR professional or anyone for that matter at manufacturers about what does it mean for them, because it can actually carry a different sense based on the company, based on what they're trying to achieve. That's the first thing. So, you know, there's not one single answer, but generally speaking, I know that, you know, some companies and HR professionals are, you know, getting anxious about, you know, attracting the right talent, especially when it comes to all, you know, to the management and implementation of all those new technologies. But the first thing is having those talents, technology-driven talents. It's only one side of the equation. If you think about, you know, implementing new technology within the company for internal processes or as a way to serve clients better, you will also need all sorts of other skills that are not new, such as, you know, anything related to project management, anything related to operation continuity, anything related to governance and planning. I mean, I'm thinking people in charge of technology roadmap, innovation and best practices scouting. We're talking about analysts here. Functional evaluations. That's you know, business-driven people that will probably be there and actually have, you know, already experiences and probably are readily available within manufacturing company. So back to your question, it's, you know, how does it affect the HR function? Well, the first thing is to not narrow it to exclusively those new buzzword technology, and think about it as, again, as a long-term transformation, and not, you know, try to go against the clock and say, okay, in 2 years from today, we need to be an Industry 4.0 company, because first, you won't achieve that. Second, if you decide at one point, I am one of those companies, well, you know, you're wrong. Again, it's a long discovery process, and, you know, it won't stop at a point in time.
So that's great. You actually answered our second question, which was how digital transformation impact human resource planning. You mentioned the fact that it's a time constraint. It has to be looked into, you know, years as opposed to just focus on the buzzword. Now, when it comes to, we had recently a statement from Jim Kim, the CEO of World Bank, commenting on the transformative impact of AI, robotization, and future innovation on the global manufacturing workforce, and the prospect of massive job loss. You're an expert in, let's say, robotization, IoT, and the rest of it. Now, should all of it be feared? Should robotization be feared? And what HR executive across the board should, you know, be prepared to do? And how to think about, you know, robot workforce, for example, differently?
Right. So, well, first of all, you know, as with any broadly adopted technological shift, some level of labor displacement will occur. It's inevitable. And it will be painful here and there, and, you know, trying to fight against it is, you know, or create a too high sense of anxiety and fear is probably wrong. Now, the exchange of labor shift or labor displacement will be directly influenced by how business and technology leaders perceive and apply this new class of innovation and embrace, you know, say, Industry 4.0 or broader digital transformation. Is it to incrementally do something all better? So in other words, I will simply like put new machine and new system and new technology to go faster than, you know, a human being, say, or is it to do something new? And I'll make a very quick example. Right now, through a trend that actually exists within the robotics industry, there's something like that trend. It's about assistive robotics or robotics augmentation. So you can think about exoskeleton in the context of, you know, military or healthcare use cases. But generally speaking, you can define that as a system for which the cognitive intelligence is provided by a human user and supplemented by computing and sensing components. So in addition, to the actuation components, so basically the robot, can be used to augment and or reproduce a human user's sequence of action. So in that sense, you all of a sudden create an entirely new class of operational processes that would be made available to your organization. And there, all of a sudden, you don't talk about the fear of having your job replaced. Your job will be transformed as part of a more broad corporate transformation. But there's no need to fear in that case that you will be replaced.
It's very interesting because you're actually echoing the words of Esben Ostergaard. He's the CTO and co-founder of Universal Robotic. He recently said that he believed that robots help human workforce, and companies need to think about augmentation as opposed to depletion. So augmentation as in augmented capabilities, competencies for human. Now, do you think there is kind of a rollout guide for HR manager when it comes to dealing with human workforce and non-human workforce, and how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a step-by-step or roadmap or something like that to make that happen, I think yes, and there's not one guideline for it. There's actually, it really depends on how your organization is perceiving everything. But for many segments of the Industry 4.0 provider ecosystems, I'm talking about people coming up with those technology solutions. In many cases, they are too weak to influence the manufacturing industry. So, and this is where the lack of clear roadmap might come from. I mean, at least it's one of the reasons. So, therefore, for them, they solely provide cost reduction solution to respond to the obvious rather than to the needed. So cost reduction, aka efficiency gain by replacing current human labor. So in that sense, then it is the individual manufacturer's near-term interest to encourage and protect innovative minds and think through those kind of new trends as human augmentation, for example, and to get inspired by this kind of new team or new mindset they create, and not to necessarily integrate them too much into the core structure of the company. So I was talking before about like creating some kind of incubator, even just like innovation incubator, not necessarily technology innovation incubator, slightly outside of the company, to make sure that creativity will burgeon and create those new models, and then therefore from there actually enable HR professional to step by step and in an agile way, as someone was saying, create that roadmap. I mean, if today, given the maturity of all those technology beyond the buzzword, you are trying to really create a roadmap and stick to it, you might probably have to change it within 6 months. And that wouldn't be efficient. So it's more about having a vision of where you want to be as an entire organization. How do you want your current and potentially new client, new market to perceive you? What sort of value are you offering them? So the deal being like, don't get stuck in, simple transformation of, small part of operational task in order to create, slightly improve, profitability. Profitability, especially in the manufacturing industry, will come from being able to provide a better client experience, a renewed client experience, coming up with new business model, becoming more of a service companies rather than just like saying we're manufacturers. So it's the entire mindset.
That's very interesting, because you also cover the fact that how manufacturing company can convey a sense of innovation. So we're going to move forward to one of the other topics, which is one of your expertise, which is IoT competence development.
Mm-hmm.
And would it be possible for you to tell us what will be in the future, let's say 2 to 3 years, the prevailing skills, competencies, and expertise or profile within the manufacturing companies, having in mind that you have different type of company, very high tech, not high tech. So what type of, let's say, profile are to be expected within the 2 to 3, 5 years?
Right. So different type of profile. Certainly profile that are geared toward innovation and have been exposed to, say, fast-paced innovation. So startup profile are great. People who have had some kind of entrepreneur journey at some point in their career will also be extremely important. If you think profile as skills, and as we know, as much as there is some level of already labor shortage when it comes to the old-fashioned, say, operational skills required by manufacturers, the same shortage is occurring for like those new tech management profiles. And you can actually, I mean, instead of really trying to necessarily attract them and be better than the company next to you or in the manufacturing sector or other, you can also consider, a partnership, working with, system integrators, those kind of things as a first step to do that. But I think that, to attract people will actually be hands-on into the technology and feel confident that, they're not just here to execute on a corporate strategy, but they are part of a very broad corporate mindset geared toward innovation. I think getting like that sense of entrepreneurship and getting those skills in is extremely important. As important, again, the need for already existing and readily available skills, strategy, project management, governance, planning. Those are sometimes at manufacturers because they didn't really have to change drastically anything for the past 20 or 30 years. They're out there in the market, but they might not be there too much, or actually with the right mindset and culture within manufacturers. So those ones are probably the one that will also fuel the will for more like cool tech profile to come in.
That's interesting. You mentioned cool tech profile to come in. So we're going to shift to something that is very close to you, since you're one of the, let's say, instigator of the robots as a service. So can you explain to us what is the concept of a chief robotic officer? What type of company can afford it? What type of scenario goes into it? And what type of profile is it precisely? And does everybody needs it or not?
That's an excellent question. So yes, we came up with the concept of the chief robotic officer about 2-3 years ago. First of all, let me make it clear, the term chief robotic officer, it's a rallying flag. So it's more like to say, okay, instead of giving titles and name to things, let's just use that name. Now, it's not about one individual, one person, even if there will be, and there is already in some company, chief robotic officer. It represents, a new corporate function, a new, set of skills, competencies put together as, a defined team within the enterprise. Now, the fundamentals at enterprise level to actually embrace that sort of, concept and look, from an organizational standpoint, well, first it starts with having the ambition to streamline new technology, robotics, IoT, AI, I mean, robotics-driven technologies adoption across the board. So it's not just for operational effectiveness, it's also meant to actually transform client experience, new value proposition, and on. Then there's a big need to have a vision beyond operational efficiency gains or production sustainability. So say for example, due to labor shortage. And there's, probably actually the core one is having an aspiration at top level toward the evolution of products and services, as well as an enhancement of potential addressable target market. So you're thinking, okay, as a manufacturer, here are my set of clients. Now I will want to actually say directly target consumers by creating micro manufacturing and basically being able to manufacture in small factory, kind of, as close as possible from point of consumption. So basically, my clients and the people I might deal with tomorrow directly might be consumers, for example, because I'm also able to provide, mass customization of whatever I'm producing. There, you see, like, this is what I meant by, aspiration and vision. It's like, all of a sudden, and new target market is all of a sudden, I am actually willing to try out to completely change the way I will go to market with whatever I'm doing. It doesn't change the core competency of the company. You're still a manufacturer, but you are actually expanding in a completely different way. You're not just trying to gain market shares by actually being able to say to any clients, hey, Mr. Clients, I'm producing at 0.1% less money than my next competitor. It's all of a sudden you disrupt that by going maybe directly to top end user, if I may.
Okay, so in that case, what type of training is needed? Because I understand that in the case of, let's say, new business unit and chief robotic officer, you need to have a new set of skills, new set of competencies. How can you work with your existing workforce or people to gain or to upskill or to enhance certain set of competencies? What is the plan in short words?
Well, so in very short, and like I said before, it's about the vision you create at first. So, and I said that before too, Industry 4.0 concept are in a way defined, from a technology perspective, but not necessarily from, a where does it take me perspective, if you like. So it's the training you might want to put in place, or the continuous formation of your staff is very much linked to where you want to be. So again, from one company to another in manufacturing, it will depend. If you decide to go more for, say, the production of consumer goods and decide to all of a sudden address them directly, so bypass, say, the retail industry, maybe you will need to think about your marketing, communication, and even sales force to train them simply on how to engage and talk to consumers. That can be as simple as that. But again, you have to base it based on the vision you have to where you want to be tomorrow in terms of the value you bring to your current market and your next market. So there's not necessarily one single broad answer. And going through examples, could take the day, but that's where you have to think, and you have to be now. In most cases, the first step of new technology adoptions, they do not necessarily require actually so much training. Like I said, working with system integrators that actually do have those skills, and as part of, say, contract negotiation, having them to hand over gradually what they're doing and how they implement those innovations to make sure that people internally understand that, embrace that, and get creative about it for the next step can be, a right way to do that. But there's no really a training right now. And by the way, like I was saying, we're at the very beginning of that, trends like Industry 4.0, anything. So it's difficult to figure out right now, okay, what sort of training you need to do. It's actually, again, before you think training, think vision for the enterprise, and make sure as an HR professional that you are included and have your word in any sort of strategic, corporate strategic planning exercise beyond just HR. Make sure you're there. Make sure you have a say.
That's very interesting. Fact is that we're gonna conclude with this presentation, and because we have a follow-up webinar in the coming month, so it's best to keep the next answer, the answer for the next webinar. However, we do have questions from the audience. And would it be possible for both of you, Saul and Remy, to respond to them? I have one question here about STEM education, for instance. This would be for you, Remy. Is there STEM education and diversity, basically? First question, is STEM education the only pathway for manufacturing leadership?
No, absolutely not. And build manufacturing, like right now, those STEM profile, you know, they have a tendency to be more attracted by, say, solution providers than directly manufacturers. As you were mentioning, this Deloitte 2016 survey at the beginning of the webinar. But one thing when I work with solution providers, especially startup, is by actually having too many of those STEM educated staff, they very often lack that sense of, you know, business purpose, sense of business purpose, if I may, and are not actually, I mean, they're coming up with technological solutions that are amazing, but that are very often either completely useless or actually not matching or embracing even the beginning of a vision that some of their clients could have, and in that sense, fuel that sort of, you know, little negativity about, you know, oh, you know, we'll be replaced by machine because they're only working into those, you know, solutions that are made to, you know, more for replacement. So absolutely not. Certainly, it's important. What's important is to have the right mix between business vision, corporate vision, STEM education, and on and on.
And Saul, what about diversity and branding and manufacturing? What is your take on the matter?
Well, I mean, I was thinking a little bit about the STEM. I know some of my experience with IBM, they launched a really innovative STEM education program, which is a 6-year high school plus associate degree program, which has been pretty fascinating to watch. I mean, I also have been sort of witnessing a resurgence of talk about the value of a liberal arts education, people who learn how to learn. So I'm a little bit on the fence about that. I mean, I think people who go through a traditional education are just as likely to achieve success, you know, perhaps more so in management than the STEM education path, which is obviously more engineering based. You know, I'm a strong believer in diversity across the board. I also think that you know, there's some interesting HR issues that, at least again in the United States, that people need to face around diversity, which are far from being resolved. But brands that take strong stances on diversity, I think, you know, IBM is another great example of that. Even though they, you know, some of their leadership can fall on the conservative side, and certainly they've been part of the Donald Trump Advisory Council stuff. The organization as a whole has taken a very strong stance on diversity, and that really bodes well for them when it comes to attracting talent from all, you know, from everywhere. And you never know where great talent can come from. I mean, there are new types of genius out there that are just being discovered when it comes to developers or social media professionals or across the board.
And just to add one last thing, and that might resonate to everyone. We're talking about Chief Robotic Officer. If you think about CIO as in charge of the IT group within companies, not, you know, the number is not exact, but I think something like 65 to 70% of current CIOs do not have a technology background. And whenever a company actually employs CIOs that do not have technology background, usually technology is on average 50 to 200% better leverage than when someone comes from a technology background. So that to say, it's not like, oh, do not have a technology background, but diversity in the profiles, it's important.
That's very interesting. And my last question of the day before we close this webinar is all about, let's say, because we address many type of manufacturing company. In Europe, precisely, we have the very high tech like Siemens, but we have also smaller type of manufacturing company that operate with 500 employees and so forth. And when they are asked about Industry 4.0 or, let's say, the future of the workforce, the discourse is not yet there. So what would you advise them to do, first of all, from a competencies development point of view, but also from a branding point of view? So let us know, what would you advise to manufacturing companies that are not yet there, and that are smaller than the IBM, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, some of the themes that I've already touched upon. I mean, 500, compared to a Siemens, 500 people is pretty small, but I'm sure for the person or the people who are running a 500-person company, they're extremely successful. So, look what's at their root of their success, their values, their business model, what's authentic about how they talk about themselves and how they understand their brand. And the future is upon us. So all the things that have been discussed today that go into Industry 4.0. Each one has to be assessed and analyzed and, integrated with your perspective on your brand. And some of that can be yes, we're going to do that, and here's what it means for our company. And some of it can be, no, we're not going to do that, and here's why, and why our company believes that. And then, other aspects that we've talked about in terms of attracting a new generation of talent. Same type of thing. What are the technologies and psychographics that characterize engagement with those new employee bases? How does our brand? How can our brand connect to them in real and authentic ways? And because we know that anything short of that will may have short-term success for us, but will not lead to sustainable success in this next era of competition.
Sounds great. And Remy, what is your conclusion on this one?
Well, I would say that for say smaller type organization manufacturing, I would really encourage them to go into like innovation scaling, best practice scaling, as many new solutions are coming up now. For example, what is called collaborative robotics, which actually drastically reduce the cost of acquiring just even one say robot arm, a collaborative robot arm, and be able to play with it, do some tests and everything. I mean, we're talking, for example, like the cheaper one are costing something along the line of $10,000 to $15,000 only. I mean, we're not talking about billions of dollars to actually at their level and scale create those type of innovation group, or encourage their own people to actually play with that. It's not because you're small, and that's probably
Remy,
Industry 4.0 technologies. They become, yes.
I'm listening because the communication always a little bit challenged. So say it again, if you don't mind. Yes,
yeah,
can
you hear me? Sorry about that. So yeah, I was just saying that the beauty of Industry 4.0 is, and all the technology around that is, there's a real race from solution providers to come up with like new set of solutions that are actually at a completely new price point. So collaborative robot versus old-fashioned robotics, you drop a zero in the price. So acquiring a little collaborative robot might not cost you much more than $10,000, $15,000, and enables you to actually create at your own scale those little innovation lab internally, and have people playing around with that, and for you to let your creativity go and rethink yourself and see how you can better serve your clients. When you think about it, the big disruptions usually start with very small companies. So it's probably even better if you are a very smaller player, say.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Saul and Remy, thank you very much for your thoughts today. Again, Competence 4.0 is all about, you know, it's all about industry 4.0 for manufacturing companies, what to expect and so forth. The event is to be hosted in Vienna next year from June 12 to 14. However, in the lead toward the event, we are hosting monthly webinar. The next one will be with Maxime Trachun, who is head of talent development at Lenovo, and we'll discuss about fast-tracking leaders within the manufacturing industry. Once again, thank you very much, Saul and Remy. And for our audience here, the content of this this webinar will be made available just after the session. And that's it, basically. Thank you again to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, and see you.